From HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 320, recorded live Friday, May 18th, 2012. This episode is brought to you by Telerik, offering the best in developer tools and support. Online at telerik.com. And by Franklins.net, training developers to work smarter. And now offering Gesture Pack, a powerful gesture recording and recognition system for Microsoft Connect for Windows developers. Details at gesturepak.com. In this episode, Scott talks with Phil Haack and Tim Clem about developing GitHub for Windows.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. And today, big announcement, big exciting stuff. Phil Haack is back from GitHub. He's a quitter. He left Microsoft. He abandoned me, abandoned his team, but he went off. He did something amazing. He went to work for GitHub, and he's brought his friend Tim Clem along. Phil, what did you do? What did you make? What did you bring me? We've been teasing you about being a quitter. Anytime we see you, we just have to cough, quitter.
What an introduction.
No. In all seriousness, though, we love you, and we know you're still a big part of the community, and you're doing amazing stuff. So you and Tim and team have brought what to share?
So we've brought GitHub for Windows.
I have no musical cue. I have no ta-da. It happened in my mind, though, in my brain. I was like, ta-da. GitHub for Windows.
GitHub for Windows.
Oh, Windows. Echo. Yes.
So it's a client application for interacting with GitHub as well as a Git client. And the nice thing about it, even if you don't care for GitHub and just need a Git client, it installs everything that... I'd like to scratch that because why would anyone not care about GitHub, right? Let me roll back.
Well, hang on. Do you want to seriously roll back? Because I don't roll back on this show. Even as I'm saying this right now, I'm fully not intending to roll this back. This is the stuff of legend. You're overthinking it, my friend. You made GitHub for Windows.
Well, it's funny because I just recorded another podcast where they're like, "Oh yeah, you can just roll it back, just pause, and then roll." And say,
well, see, now you're making me feel. I thought I had an exclusive, and now you're making me feel unspecial.
No, I'm just saying.
You're not hanging out with Galloway, are you?
No, that's...
Oh, man. Phil's in trouble.
Those herding code guys. Oh, God. So, but to be clear, when you install it, it makes everything just happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's your one-stop shop for Git on Windows as well as kind of seamless interactivity with GitHub. So you basically shouldn't need to do anything other than run setup.exe.
So in the past, I go up and I Google and with Bing and I find Git and I download msys Git and I don't know what that means. And then it asks me scary questions like, do you want me to either A, destroy your path, B, destroy your system, or C, probably not work at all. And I never know which one to pick. And then I push it and then it gives me Sigwin and then I'm in some kind of strange land. And I've never quite felt like I integrated Git into my life. And then I tried PoshGit from Keith Dahlby and we worked on that and made it work in PowerShell, which was kind of cool. But I never really felt like Git belonged here. I felt like Git didn't want to be on Windows.
And I think that's actually a really common experience. The majority of Windows developers, it's like going into the woods. It's like trekking up the Amazon. You're in a foreign land. You type in some incantation into a command prompt, and all of a sudden you're in a text editor where letters don't actually type text in it, and you're like, oh my God, close the window. This is, I give up.
Yeah.
This is not the system for me. And so what we tried to do is really remove a lot of that barrier in, you don't need to pick paths being overwritten and whether you want line feeds or carriage returns and line feeds on the end of your lines in your environment. You just need to install a single utility. It does come with a full working version of msys Git, and so if you need to get down on that level, you absolutely can. But for the 90% of people who are doing kind of basic versioning tasks and pushing and pulling repositories from GitHub, you probably never have to type an obtuse Git command again in your life.
Seriously. And now the one that I've been beta testing is click once. Is it remaining click once?
It will for the initial release. We have some plans, but for version 1, we're going to distribute it with click once.
So that means that, I'll go up there, I'll push setup once. It'll be like I don't know, what is it, like 10 meg, something very small?
It's actually fairly good because we actually pack Git. We bundle Git inside the app as well. So I think it's 30 or 40 meg download, but you have a full working installation of Git included in that.
And I don't need to maintain that installation of Git.
You do not. That all comes with it. And I think one of the best parts that we've done is just the updates are really Chrome style seamless. You basically get notified when an update has already downloaded and installed on your computer, and that update might include a new version of Git.
Really? And then you just unpack Git into some special secret place, and I don't have to think about it.
You don't have to think about it.
Now, I already have a version of Git on my system,
which you can continue to use, and our Git really lives in its own sandbox, and so we write a shortcut out that you could launch to kind of pull up Git in a shell of your choosing, PowerShell or the traditional command prompt, or even Git Bash if you really are in love with VI and that tool set. I use console too, so I type in my kind of custom thing, and that ends up being what I launch, and it pulls up in the context of whatever repository you're looking at in the application. So if I'm, checking out, NuGet gallery and I want to make a contribution, I can pull up a PowerShell instance with Posh Git loaded up right within the, the path loaded of that repo.
So I'm going to try something here, and I hope this is okay. If I go here and I say git clone, but I'm doing this in the command line, except I'm going to pull from Codeplex, which now supports Git. What will happen to GitHub for Windows, and what's the relationship between Git stuff from my company versus Git stuff from Codeplex versus Git stuff from GitHub? All Git, but not all from the same place.
Well, once you've cloned it locally, you can drag it into GitHub for Windows, and you'll be able to use GitHub for Windows as a Git client for that repository. You'll miss out on some of the benefits of being able to clone directly from remote host. That's some of the things that you get with GitHub.
Okay.
But yeah, you can. What happens is you'll need to make sure you clone the HTTPS URL.
Okay, I just did that.
Which for Codeplex, I think that's the only one they offer. Bitbucket offers both. And then when you navigate drag it into GitHub for Windows, and then try to navigate.
Okay, did it.
And now go and navigate to it.
Push the little arrow, open this repo.
Yep.
Login required.
Yep. So now you enter your credentials for Codeplex there.
And it actually says Codeplex right there.
Yeah.
And boom, look at that.
Yep. And we'll cache it for you. And what's nice is if you're using our prompt, our shell, if you use the app, now you won't have to re-enter your username and password every time you make a commit and push it up.
So this is nice. I'm looking at Luan, who's one of our engineers, who's just checked something in to ASP.NET. I've got a diff. I've got old, new. I've got line numbers. I can scroll around and I can see their faces. How do you know what they look like?
So we use, across GitHub, we use Gravatar as a way to show faces next to people's users on GitHub, and it's all keyed off of an email address. So even for something like Codeplex, you are putting your email address in those commits, and as long as you've signed up for a Gravatar with that email address, then we're able to display it in the app.
Very cool. Very cool. I like that. It's nice that I can have all of my Git stuff, both GitHub, local, and at Codeplex all in one place. It seems like the real depth is once you get past that first screen and you dig into a repo.
Absolutely.
I initially didn't realize that there was much more beyond kind of this browser. I was seeing there's a Markdown editor, and then I clicked on it, and then I was like, oh, look at all this stuff. And then you can really start digging in.
Yep, and you can create branches, manage branches, delete branches, merge branches. So there's a lot you can do.
Well, there's this notion of syncing. Every time I move around, like for example, I just clicked from master to a V2 release candidate branch, and this little thing said syncing. And then I switch back and it says syncing again. What is the notion of syncing, and what does that mean to the average Joe who's not familiar with Git and GitHub?
Go ahead, Phil.
So what we're doing is we're checking the remote URL to see if there's any new commits that you might want to pull down locally. Git, like Mercurial, unlike Subversion or TFS, Git is a distributed version control system. So you have the entire repository history locally on your machine, and you can make commits and do work all locally, branch, whatever you want. And then at some point, though, you're probably going to want to share those changes with other people, and that's where sync can come in. If you've made some local commits, you'll see that the sync button will light up and be enabled so that you can click on it and push those commits up to the server.
Okay.
And likewise, if there's commits on the server that you don't have, you can click the button and it'll pull them down. And if you have commits local and commits on the server, we'll handle that situation too. When you click sync, we're going to put the server and your local repository in the same state.
Very cool. I just clicked revert commit to one of the things, and then I can see here unsynced commits, and then history, and then if I hit sync, it would go up and probably fail because I don't have permission to go directly to master. Can I make pull requests directly from here as well?
You cannot, but from any commit, you can go directly to GitHub if your repository is hosted on GitHub. And I think it's key to remember, at least for this initial version, we're really targeting github.com as the place to hold your repository. So you won't see a lot of those things if you're using a Codeplex or a Bitbucket repo.
Okay. So I'll switch back over to some of the Code 52 guys. If you check out code52.org, these are the guys that are doing a different open source project every week, and they're all hosted on GitHub. I can go up there and see what they're doing, and this has been actually really great for me to learn more about code. It's such a nice code browser. I mean, the code browser is nice on GitHub on the website, but frankly, once you've used GitHub for Windows long enough, moving around with the cursor is faster. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm looking here at history. I've got a 30-inch monitor. I've got a beautiful, Metro-looking app here, which is GitHub for Windows. And then on the right-hand side, I'm just cursoring up and down, looking at the different check-ins.
Scroll.
Yeah, and you do have infinite scroll. And what's nice about this is that I can move faster. So it's nice that we can do so many things with HTML5. But honestly, apps like this remind me why we have a client app in the first place, if you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Did you guys ever have discussions like that? Did you ever say to yourselves, well, maybe we'll just not do a Windows client. We'll just make a super amazing web page that will do what we need to do?
There's something really essential still about, the development and the design and kind of that creative aspect happening locally still. And a lot of people are attempting to do, code editing and IDEs in the browser. And in many ways, I still think that people want to unplug and have very rich native responsive tools. I mean, all of our development tools across platforms that we use are native. I mean, that is the experience that you come to love. And to edit code in a web browser is maybe convenient sometimes, but ultimately, I prefer that the native tools come into this, they're hooked up to the web and they have a paradigm of sync, and so you don't need to worry about having the latest changes of the latest version, but you get all this nice making use of your big screen and your graphics card and beautifully rendering text and that kind of stuff.
So it sounds like you're not bought into the HTML will be the thing for all applications and all problems can be solved with.
I think they'll come in the middle. I think you're finding that the web is trying to pull in more and more rich client functionality, but they can only do so in a way that's lowest common denominator against all platforms. And the native apps are starting to become more and more like the web in that they're plugged into web services and REST APIs, and your settings sync to new machines without having to tell them anything other than your username and password. And so sooner or later, I won't, I could even tear a tab out of Chrome, and all of a sudden that is actually a rich native app on my machine that's syncing and will work on the airplane without Wi-Fi.
Nice. Actually, to speak to that, I'm sitting here looking at my own GitHub repository, and I've got something that I worked on my laptop that I don't have on my big desktop that we're talking on right here, and I'm going to visit that. It's a Visual Studio extension that I wrote, and there's a button here next to the little thing that says download this repository as a zip file. It says clone in Windows, and I'm actually running Google Chrome here, so I'm not running IE. I don't have any ActiveX controls or anything. I hover over that. It says GitHub Windows : / not HTTP // I click on that and it says, do you want to launch the applications? And I say yes. And then suddenly it actually brings that down. I see the folder just appeared. It's coming down asynchronously. It's just shown up, and it even reused the instance of GitHub for Windows I already had. It didn't launch a new one.
There you go.
That's a pretty slick interaction right there.
So, and you have to compare that to, what do we try to teach people otherwise? Maybe a year ago, doing that on Windows would involve, walking through those dialogues in MsysGit, trying to understand whether your path is going to get borked, and then learning how to set up SSH keys and upload them to GitHub, and then pulling out a command prompt and figuring out the proper way to tell Git to pull a repository locally. So I think, that right there is kind of the biggest change that I hope that we're making in the ecosystem in terms of just making it easier to check out other people's code and potentially contribute to it.
Yeah, I was just today I was working on updating our help docs for the launch, and we have a page, how to get Git set up for Windows, and it's fairly long, quite a few steps, and I was like, wow, I can pretty much take all of this markup, delete it, have one line that says, click this link and you are done. And so, it's a significant amount of simplification of getting it set up, and hopefully it just lowers the barrier of entry to getting contributing to other projects, like Tim was saying.
What will users of like Tortoise Git and some of these other Explorer type things that have kind of cobbled together tools that aren't necessarily as polished visually, but maybe more functionally polished, you think that they're going to switch to GitHub for Windows, or they're just going to find that they'll use GitHub for Windows for 80-90% of what they're doing, and then if they need something super advanced, they'll hop into another alternate tool?
I expect people to use a hybrid of tools. Our target was really to bring in people who were basically completely turned off by having to install a command line utility to use our website. And so we kind of want to extend the invitation to be part of this open source thing, or even your private source collaboration on GitHub. But, a lot of those tools in many ways still require you to go read the Git documentation. You right click and you get a list of every Git command, revert, reset, soft mix, tar, you still have to go understand, what do all my 17 menu options, what is that actually going to do to my repository?
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and I've found that I use both the command shell, PowerShell with PoshGit, and the GitHub for Windows application in a kind of mixed workflow, because the GitHub for Windows app doesn't support some of the advanced things that I like to do once in a while. Like if I want to do a patch commit where I'm only adding specific lines of certain files to the index, right?
Right.
That's the kind of thing that most people don't care about. Maybe I shouldn't, but I do sometimes, and so I'll drop to the command line to do that. But GitHub for Windows has certain niceties. For example, when you're entering a commit message, it has a field for sort of the so if you're unfamiliar with the Git commit message, it's really just one block of text. But there's a convention. If you the first line followed by a new line followed by a description, right? So title, new line, description. And the title really should only be a certain number of characters. If you type more than that number of characters, you'll notice on GitHub that it starts to bleed into the description. But what we've done in GitHub for Windows, and I don't know.
I'm looking at it right now. I've got an uncommitted changes, and it says commit message required. So I'm typing.
So keep typing, and eventually
then it turns gray.
Yeah, the characters turn gray, and what that's telling you is that everything that's gray is sort of too long for the nice-looking single-line description. And you're free to commit it that way, but it's kind of a hint to say, maybe you want to shorten the one-liner and write something in the description and create a nice Git commit message.
So I've just made, while we were talking here, it says unsynced commit, and it's garbage. Basically, I reverted something, and I've just kind of slapped the keyboard. I don't want to do that.
There you go. You can roll back. So
I would click, and I would say roll back to this commit.
Yep.
And I go back to so now, and it says no committed changes, and now I'm back to where I was. So I made a mistake, and I put it right back where it was.
And I think that's a very hard thing for people to figure out how to do in Git, mainly because the terminology is confusing. You have reverts and resets and various command line switches that drastically change the behavior of the command. And so we really simplified it into two things. A revert is actually a new commit that is exactly the opposite of the commit you're reverting. So you think of all the diff patch that you added, that is like the inverse, the opposite patch applied, which should take those changes out of the code base. And then a rollback is literally like take all those changes and pull that commit off the top of the stack. But we leave those changes dirty in your working directory. So you're free to fully delete them, or maybe you made a mistake and you just need to update a file or delete a file or add something else in there that you forgot.
That's really interesting.
And then make another commit, which will then add that to the top of the list.
Yeah,
Right.
you can right click on those files in the file list, the changes, and discard the changes. So that's,
because if I back up, like I'm looking here at the ASP.NET, I back up 2 days ago, and I say roll back to this commit. Now it says I have uncommitted changes. So I backed up, but those changes are ready to be committed.
And what we're doing there is we're not throwing away any of that work. We're basically bringing you back to that state right before you would have made the next set of commits.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that way you can do a slight amend to it, or you can go ahead and right click and discard those changes. And so, I really like the fact that we don't discard that stuff automatically.
So I want to dig a little bit into a couple of things that I thought that were particularly interesting here, because someone might just say, okay, lovely, this is like Phil and Hanselman together again, our new friend Tim, and we're doing an advertisement for GitHub for Windows. But let's dig into this, because there's two things I think you did that were significant. When I click and say, I can click on a little gear here and say open in command prompt. But what's significant to me about that is if you go into your settings here, your options, here it is, default shell. This is the options for GitHub for Windows. It says CMD, what I like to call DOS, even though it's not, cmd.exe, git bash, PowerShell, or custom. So you actually have 4 different choices. So you've got an advanced option here that says I can pick the shell that I want. But there's a little icon with a picture of your is it called Octocat?
There you go. You got it.
You have the Octocat. It says git shell. So depending on which shell I pick, that's what the git shell becomes. If I want to use console 2 and I double click on git shell, it will be the git shell.
Correct.
Yep. That's what Tim and I have set up.
Yeah. You do. You use console, and you're using console 2 with PowerShell?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then when you use PowerShell, you partnered up, didn't you, to make PowerShell better for Git?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We take advantage of one major thing in particular, and that's Keith Dahlby's Posh Git, which really changes your experience on the command line in terms of interacting with a Git repository and kind of understanding the current state and status.
Yes.
Yeah, we used quite a bit of open source in this project, which was a lot of fun.
Was that difficult? Like, I know that when we did this at Microsoft, there's patent searches and there's asking bosses and stuff. I assume you guys just like get a cigar and you just say, yeah, we're going to use this. Was there a lawyer involved at any point, or was it really just like over beers?
There was no lawyer involved. Everything was over beers. We've tried to. Everyone is credited in the app. If someone really feels strongly that we've infringed, we will go drink beer with someone else and use their open source project. So,
but we've tried hard to comply with the with the terms of the licenses, right? These are all open source licenses, so it's not really that hard to use them.
Yep. Yeah, everything we've used has an explicit open source license. Some of them are on GitHub. I think a couple of them are on Codeplex. And so we've pulled those into in the credits of the application.
So when you found open source that wants to be used, you used it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in fact, if you go into the options menu, you should see from the main dashboard, you should see a credits option, and you can click on that, and you can see all the various projects that we've credited.
Credit. One of the things I'm noticing too is I move around. Like, for example, I'm doing a sync right now off over one place, but I'm still able to move around. The thing hasn't locked up at all. When I say locked up, I don't mean like in a crashed way, but I mean it hasn't made me wait for anything. It seems asynchronous in pretty much everything that it's doing.
Absolutely.
That smells like Paul Betts.
Yeah.
That is definitely his scent.
And which is the tool of Paul's that you use? I talked to him about this a while back, but I don't want to necessarily lead the interview too far.
Reactive UI, which builds a UI framework for WPF that builds on top of reactive extensions.
Yes, you can get that at reactiveui.net, the single page homepage for Reactive UI that I berated Paul into making when I told him about it. I said, this is amazing. Where's your homepage? Like, I don't have one. It's like, you need to make a homepage right now. Yeah. And he made this great one. And you actually, Phil, I've seen you tweet a number of times that it's completely changed the way that you thought about UI.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. And about UI and about how to do async, and it's really gotten me kind of in love with declarative functional programming, and it's so impressed. What I really love about it is it impressed a lot of the other guys at GitHub who are working on the Mac app so much that they built reactive Cocoa.
No.
And it's published on GitHub now. So it's an open source project that brings basically the same reactive paradigm to Objective-C developers for the Mac OS.
Wow, that's very exciting.
Their block syntax is a little ugly, but
yeah.
What?
Well, that's just the magic of Objective-C. I'm sorry.
It looks ugly, but at least they can do some of the same kind of beautiful interactions in a very ugly language.
So you did this app in WPF, of course. How has been that experience? Because I know that a lot of people felt that WPF had a rough start and the fonts were really blurry. But ever since kind of Metro Twit kind of came out and paved the way to make a good looking application, I'm seeing more and more WPF apps that don't suck. This seems to be it's fast, it paints quickly, it's beautiful, it's clear, the fonts look sharp. Any trouble?
I'll let Tim go first on this, and then I'll tell you.
Yeah, what's good, what's bad?
Yeah, I think we had a generally a really positive experience with WPF, and definitely, we work in a really cross-platform environment, and so it's fun to compare notes with the iOS guys and the web guys about how they're solving layout and transparency problems and doing animations and those kind of things. And at the end of the day, like, WPF kind of blows a lot of those things out of the water in terms of the tool set around building interfaces and the design time environment. And then even just having a versionable format of our interfaces. I mean, if you're doing iOS development, you got these basically nib files, which don't show anything on GitHub. You can't tell when anybody's moved a button around or changed a color somewhere. And so I think from that aspect, we really had a very, very, very positive experience with WPF. And it's, at this point, version 4, things are fairly mature. The text blurriness, I think, got ironed out when Visual Studio started adopting more WPF. There are certainly its quirks and some corner things and certain elements which still kind of I see and drive me nuts in the application. But in general, it is a Butamus framework to work in. And I think maybe the biggest stamp of approval was, at GitHub, you kind of have to convince people to work on a project. And from day one in working on this, I knew I had to have design involvement because everything that GitHub does involves design as kind of a core competency. And so I had to talk basically a designer into, turning off his Mac and turning on a Windows computer and hacking on this with me. And the WPF and the Metro UI sold it 100%. I had an afternoon of demonstrating actually some Windows Phone apps and the Zune app and some other Metro Twit and some other things, and I had him sold, and he was off. He had his grid system set up, and he was just in love with the typography and the layout and his ability to basically conceive anything design-wise, and I would say, oh, sure, absolutely, I can do that. That's no problem.
Seriously. This is like some kind of antimatter type of a situation here where one of us is going to explode.
It's a little weird, isn't it?
It is extremely weird because I can only assume... I can only assume that those are extremely uncomfortable conversations, and there are those that are simply closed-minded and like, Metro sucks, Metro all the things, and we're screwing up and they're screwing up and everyone's, there's a lot of emotional baggage between Windows people and Mac people.
Yep.
So it's always nice when they just kind of get together and make something pretty.
Well, and if you'll notice the Metro style, we came up with our own style GitHub default avatars. If your email address doesn't have an avatar, or if your org email address doesn't have an avatar, there's a set of default ones in the application.
I see
and
that. Those
actually, I think they got slightly tweaked, but have been adopted on GitHub.com proper because everybody liked them so much. So.
It's interesting that you say that because there's a very significant style and there's some very specific, very subtle things about GitHub, and then latest the buttons have a kind of a shadow on them. It's evocative of Cocoa and Mac, but not in an overt way. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, looking at the GitHub site right here in front of me on the screen next to the Metro GitHub for Windows, they are echoes of each other, and they are evocative of each other, but they both kind of stand alone, but the branding is consistent.
Yep. And we talked a lot about, we call it GitHub flavored Metro. So we didn't totally follow all of the Metro design principles. We kind of took some leeway and made some decisions on our own, but we really wanted it to feel like a coherent part of the product. We didn't want to develop something that didn't feel like GitHub. I
also thought it was interesting that you didn't just slap the GitHub logo into the upper left corner. Even though it's possible that you could do that, like your app is effectively Chromeless. It is just a big white window with just the code.
Yep. And I wouldn't, I won't say too much, but I wouldn't be surprised. We're really trying to move towards this Chromeless direction. Maybe not as drastically as some Metro apps go, but this idea of the content is what matters. Like you visit GitHub to look at your code. You don't visit it to see our fancy graphics
the Octacat
or our logo even necessarily. So.
Yeah, I mean, because ultimately every single screen, every single interaction doesn't have to be an advertisement for you.
Absolutely.
Because I'm already using it.
Absolutely. And even the way the company is structured, we don't make money off of ads in any form. We aren't interested in, if you're on GitHub looking at code, most likely you know who GitHub is and you know about the brand. So
yeah, that's really cool. I really appreciate you guys talking to me. Thank you for doing this and for bringing this to the community. And where will people be able to download this stuff? So everything will be on windows.github.com. And there'll be a big blog post you should be able to see on the top of our site. And that's the place to go to download the app. One click to install. And is the Clone in Windows button going to appear everywhere, and people will kind of get it organically? So if you are running Windows, everyone will have the Clone in Windows button. If you have installed and run the app, if you've logged in to GitHub for Windows, that button will act as what it says it does, Clone in Windows. If it doesn't, it will direct you over to the download site. So. Very cool. I really appreciate it. Good to see you, Phil. You too, Scott. And nice to meet you, Tim, and I hope I will see you again. Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.